Throughout 30 years, Guatemala became the home of anarchy and impunity. Human rights are violated daily and at unacceptable rates, with no justice. A laboratory for emergent Cold War policies, the country was polarized between the communist insurgency and the Guatemalan government. Its mountains faced a constant battle between guerrilla groups and the Guatemalan army, and the cities raged with fear of torture, disappearance, and death. Violence and betrayal were no strangers for Guatemalans, since the population was given no option of neutrality. Being forced to pick a side, men and women alike were bound to become enemies and targets of opposing groups. From this principle surged growing numbers of desaparecidos and extrajudicial assassinations, and only few, like Myrna Mack, had the courage to defy the system and search for justice. As the co-founder and coordinator of the Association for the Advance in Social Science in Guatemala, or AVANSCO, Myrna Elizabeth Mack Cheng was one of the first researchers who traveled to isolated villages affected by the armed conflict, like the Ixil Triangle, where she posed a threat of exposing the military's actions against the internally displaced. On September 11, 1990, Myrna Mack was brutally stabbed to death as she was leaving her office.
Mi hermana, dentro de sus conclusiones, decía que era importante que la Cruz Roja Internacional y las iglesias atendieran desde la perspectiva humanitaria la problemática de los desplazados. ¿Qué implicaba eso? El ingreso de la Cruz Roja Internacional para atender a los desplazados internos de Guatemala, que era alrededor del 20% de la población, significaba aceptar el conflicto armado interno. Y eso era lo que ellos, desde la perspectiva política, lo han negado, lo siguen negando, y por eso mataron a Myrna.
Realizing that nothing was being done to achieve justice for her sister's death, Helen Mack needed a leader willing to confront such a demanding and controversial affair, and that is who she became. She brought forth a vision that motivated others and took on the fight against impunity in Guatemala. We do not want violence, hatred, or revenge. We want to ensure justice that guarantees the end of the arbitrariness and impunity. With the help of the Attorney General's office, Helen Mack took the Myrna Mack case to court with the objective of condemning both the material and intellectual authors of her sister's assassination. On September 29th, the Criminological Research Department of the National Police concluded the first report on the crime under the command of José Mérida Escobar and Julio César Pérez Ixcajop. In this report, the two investigators of the National Police identified Noel de Jesús Beteta Álvarez, a former specialty sergeant who worked for the Presidential Security Department at the time of the crime, as one of the main suspects responsible for the death of Myrna Mack. But with such incomplete evidence and the heavy political toll on the country's judicial system, the Myrna Mack case was bound to be a groundbreaking challenge. An anonymous witness who was a colleague to Myrna identified Beteta as one of the men who were in a waiting attitude on September 11, 1990, outside the Avansco offices. Later, bystander Juan Carlos Marroquín Tejeda stated he saw an individual of an anatomy resembling that of Beteta carried through the assassination. By 1991, despite the evidence, testimonies, and pleas for justice, nothing had been done about the Myrna Mack case. Several national and international organizations demanded clarification on Myrna Mack's killing from the Guatemalan government. Because Myrna was highly recognized as an anthropologist in the academic field, political pressure quickly rose, and on July 4, 1991, the Attorney General's office ordered the arrest of Beteta. The Attorney General, Asisclo Valladares, said, "Justice must not see ranks, or uniforms, or powers of any kind. It must be applied without discrimination because peace will only be achieved under a state of rights in which justice is properly carried out." As the search for Beteta continued, the case's investigations faced complications. To everyone's confusion, there were two reports on the motive for the murder, and the court set out to discover which one was true. In a surprising turn of events, Mérida testified that the motive was political and not robbery, after which he hopelessly affirmed, "Today, I have signed my death sentence." Effectively, 9 days later, he was extrajudicially executed. Still, Helen Mack was determined and focused on defeating impunity. Shortly after Mérida's death, Beteta was found in Los Angeles, where he had fled less than a month after the assassination of Myrna Mack, and was brought back to Guatemala on December 4, 1991. Beteta said, I did not kill her. I had never heard of her. I did not know her.
Él estaba seguro de que iba a quedar en la total impunidad, como eran todos los casos de violaciones a los derechos humanos.
Witnesses and judges received anonymous threats, causing many of them to later recant for fear of retribution. Many were attacked and 11 different judges became involved in the Myrna Mack case. Regardless of many unfavorable and hindering events, Helen would not be silenced. Jesus Beteta Alvarez's behavior makes his actions suspicious, and with the evidence he is convicted and sentenced to 25 years in incommutable prison for being responsible of the action. In February 1993, Beteta was sent to prison and Helen Mack obtained justice from the man who pulled the trigger. The conviction of Noel de Jesus Beteta Alvarez was only the first step toward the truth, but from there began the revealing of the participation of other individuals involved in the assassination. Helen continued to search for justice from Beteta's chiefs, Colonels Guillermo Oliva Carrera and Juan Valencia Osorio, and General Edgar Augusto Godoy Gaitan, whom she considered the intellectual authors of her sister's murder, and ultimately the people truly responsible for her death. It was not until September of 2002, 12 years after Myrna Mack was killed, that a trial was opened against Valencia, Godoy, and Oliva. On September 3, 2002, Valencia was condemned to 30 years in prison, and Godoy and Oliva were absolved. Regardless of the acquittal of Godoy and Oliva, the sentencing of Colonel Valencia and the fact that we attended a trial such as the one held from September 3 to October 3, 2002, reaffirms my belief that it is possible to see justice in Guatemala, even if it means a sustained struggle for 12 years or more. Less than a year later, Valencia appealed and was absolved and released. Though he was later reconvicted, he escaped and is now a fugitive. Organizations around the world were outraged and considered this series of events a serious setback for justice. Almost immediately, Helen Mack's legacy became evident nationally and internationally.
El caso de mi hermana fue el primer caso de violaciones a derechos humanos que se empezó a trabajar en el sistema en medio de un conflicto armado.
The Myrna Mack case was also the first to take senior officers to trial for a crime committed during the armed conflict, and the first for intellectual murder in Guatemala. It is the only case in which an intellectual authority has been condemned. While the Myrna Mack case was closed, it was not the end of Helen Mack's leadership in the fight against impunity. She continued to promote the pursuit of justice in Guatemala through the Myrna Mack Foundation, which she had created and directed since 1993 to drive the consolidation of peace and democracy. In 1999, the Diario Militar, a military document describing war crimes committed during the armed conflict, was published.
El Diario Militar es una crónica y es una prueba de que hubo violaciones a los derechos humanos. Muchos familiares de las víctimas que aparecen en el Diario Militar vinieron a la fundación para que le apoyáramos en ese caso concretamente.
Hoping to end impunity in the Diario Militar case, they went to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. It was not until 2011 that the case was presented to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
Hemos ido avanzando. Yo esperaría que en este mes de septiembre, octubre, podamos tener la sentencia ya de la Corte Interamericana y va a ser otro paso que vamos a ganar en esta lucha contra la impunidad.
On September 21, 2012, the state of Guatemala was sentenced for the crimes described in the Diario Militar, and in September of 2014, it was also declared to be in contempt. Helen Mack made history with admirable courage, persistence, and leadership. Although Myrna Mack's case was not an extraordinary one, together the Mack sisters have had a profound impact on Guatemala's government and judicial system. Their ongoing legacy is apparent through the significant change in the judicial atmosphere and tolerance for impunity. They filled their countrymen with hope, bravery, and determination, and brought them closer to a just and impunity-free Guatemala. Regardless of political affiliation, Helen Mack became an admirable and exemplary leader for advocates of justice in Guatemala and internationally, and she continues to extend her already solidified legacy.